Welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and my co-host is Chris Lucian. And very excited to have Nick Del Grosso on the show today to talk about a lot of fun things, including a lot of learning type stuff. So lifelong learning in the software industry, how mobbing changes classrooms, and potentially many things in education in general. So looking forward to these topics. I personally am very passionate about the topic of education and learning. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversations with Nick. But before we dive into the topics, Nick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I finished a PhD in systems neuroscience a couple of years ago, and I had a background in psychology and behavioral neuroscience. And I really liked this idea that we could learn about who we were by studying the brain. And I really like the approach of cognitive psychologists that treated parts of the brain as a black box system, very similar to how software engineers will treat a software system, and how you could decompose it and try to send things in and look at what came out to try to better piece together what was happening. And one day I saw a video of someone building a brain machine interface with stroke patients to help people who are with locked in patients at the time who couldn't move but could use their brains to communicate through electrodes. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to learn how to build one of those. And that led me to moving to Germany from the US. And I've been here for about 10 years and got to work with a lot of different kind of closed loop approaches of studying neuroscience. And eventually I ended up having so much fun learning how to program, as like a lot of people do, and teaching programming, that I eventually became a little bit disenchanted by how science works. And I became a little bit passionate about the reproducibility crisis in science, which means a lot of publications coming out aren't able to be replicated by other scientists, and there are a lot of questions about why and how science is even being done in the first place, which mirrors a lot of the frustrations that inspired like this whole DevOps movement in software engineering. I saw parallels between those two, and that really pushed me into that direction to look for ways to apply Agile, lean thinking into the research and education environment. And I thought that programming was a really good way to teach some of those ways of thinking. So now I teach workshops in programming, and I work with scientists to build research software and look for opportunities to use these approaches.
Wow, very, very cool. Very unique background there. And what kind of led you into becoming aware of or part of the mobbing world?
Well, I was leading a meetup on data science in Munich. It was the Munich branch of PyData. And so I became really active on Meetup. And one day I saw an event by Bob Allen and Dmitry Pavlovev, and it was a mob retreat over the weekend, and it just completely opened my eyes. I thought this is what I've been looking for. It was simple, it was really effective, and it took away all the barriers to learning that I've been seeing in other environments. And so I kind of dove headfirst into it. And when COVID happened, it gave lots of opportunities to reach out to meetup groups around the world and kind of take part in those discussions, which is how I met Joel Norman and the Canton Coders.
That's awesome. Yeah. So quick plug. We'll put in the show notes a link to Dimitri and Bob on the show talking about that retreat. So I think we have an episode before the retreat. So that's really cool that to see all the dots connect. And then Joel he was a big part of our mob programming workshop, DevOps mob programming workshop. So it's just cool to see the community interacting in different ways and seeing the chain reaction of events. So very, very, very cool. So I guess we'll come back to mobbing, but I guess the first topic up for us is the emphasis on continuous lifelong learning in the software industry. So what are your thoughts here?
Well, I've always been very impressed by the attitude that expert programmers have in industry. Like, they seem very humble They're just always learning. I would do these beginners events, these teaching events, which were really meant at first to teach people who had never programmed before how to do some basic data analysis, what this is all about. And you'd see CTOs or people who had been programming for 40 years show up to them and still revisit the fundamentals and look for new ways of doing things. And that kind of attitude on that level wasn't something I was seeing within education. A lot of teachers had kind of gotten their curriculum together and then they'd stopped. And I thought, well, this is really amazing. Of course, it's necessary in software. Things are changing all the time, and it seems like those who kind of think that they'll learn everything and then they stop studying, they tend to fall behind pretty quickly. Yeah, I mean, I thought this was really a good place to start looking at how they approached learning and incorporating into their daily work.
Is there anything in particular that you've discovered from your observations or parallels to your scientific background that you can draw?
Yeah, well, there are a few different things. One of the things that I most encounter, because I'm working with beginners, is the difference between someone who feels like they're new to a field, that they're a beginner in a field, and someone who's gotten a little bit of experience with the field. Maybe they finished their first project or they've been there for a year or so, and they might consider themselves to be kind of intermediate level of whatever it is. And just how different their attitudes are to their work and to the people around them. Beginners are often, they have a lot of, they suffer from imposter syndrome, right? They worry a lot about whether they belong there, whether they're going to fit in, whether they have the right personality to be a programmer or to be a scientist or to be like, and there's a lot of emphasis placed on them about whether they have the right motivations to belong in this core group. And this touches on anxieties regarding education. When people sit down in front of a computer and they're asked to program something, past feelings about math, about logic, and about just struggles with computer start to come up. And this is them interacting with some black box systems, like computers often are black box systems, and people feel like they should know what they're doing, when really, I mean, no one knows what the computers are doing. They're always doing different things. They're always black boxes, or they feel responsible for their past failures to learn certain lessons early on. And getting over those anxieties is often the major roadblock to helping them move from beginner to intermediate. But intermediates oftentimes feel much stronger imposter syndrome because the gaps in their knowledge increase over time. So they say, oh, I've done a lot, I must know everything. But for some reason, they realize they're always struggling. Every time the project changes a little bit, suddenly they don't know what's going on. And they have to choose between defining themselves as a specialized person, even though they don't really fully understand the place they've specialized, or whether they should just leave because they are never good enough in the first place. They often, those gaps sometimes produce kind of a macho culture, competitive culture, where people are trying to defend the places where they feel insecure. And oftentimes when those two groups interact with each other, especially in a normal classroom or work environment, they can often repel each other. An intermediate person can feel more comfortable because they know some answers, but they can feel bored and frustrated because they're not able to communicate and pass on that knowledge to the person that's asking them questions. And a beginner can feel intimidated and frustrated and like an outsider. And because those gaps are so big, and because there's always new programmers, people are changing. Like an intermediate becomes a beginner every time they change direction. I wanted to find ways for those two groups to help support each other and smoothly transition into that expert level of security with learning and taking on new challenges and just interacting with everyone around them. And I think this is something that I'd like to see that more in universities. Oftentimes, professors are treated as the highest attainment of knowledge in the field, and when you talk to those same professors, they often aren't very impressed by by classroom teaching, right? Oftentimes they say, well, my teaching is not very worth much. You should be in the lab doing the real work. And when I talk to people in industry about universities, oftentimes they say, well, yeah, but academics think that all learning happens in the classroom. And I realize that no one really thinks that learning is happening in the classroom. And I feel like that's a real waste of an opportunity just for the public, for us, who we invest so much into that classroom learning. It's a great opportunity to learn something. And if those at the reins don't feel like it's worth much, then maybe we should re-examine the way we're doing things.
Sure. So given that kind of lifelong learning in software, maybe what are some things that people can get from mobbing that they don't necessarily get in the classroom, maybe, or maybe even mobbing in the classroom or something along those lines? Do you have any opinions there?
One of the things that they can get in the classroom is the ability to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to do this, or what is happening right now. You've got, if you're just using a navigator and a driving rule, and you've got 4 or 5 people, let's say, in a mob, you have half the time when there's not pressure on a person, when they can observe, when they can kind of reflect, they can look at what's going on while they're in the mob, maybe contribute voluntarily the way they would do in a normal classroom setting. When they're in the navigator role, they have the chance to stop the classroom without feeling bad. It often takes only a couple of rounds before they let go of the guilt of not being able to know the answers, and they start asking questions.
Yeah.
And in the meetup sessions I've been doing, we oftentimes we oftentimes say, if you're completely lost, just no programming at all, just say, this is the time I want to spend learning. You spend that 5 minutes asking questions about every little thing, and then you move on. And then the driver role, it's a great way to gain confidence and feel like you're being supported by someone else. And that's been really wonderful. Mobbing resembles more of what's called a flipped classroom than a traditional classroom. In a flipped classroom, you're given new content inside the classroom, and then you're asked to study it at home. In a flipped classroom, you're given new content at home, and then you practice it and you develop that knowledge in the classroom when you're surrounded by people who can answer questions. Mobbing is a very simple way to ensure that people are practicing this flipped classroom approach, where the teacher is not responsible for delivering content, often out-of-date content, right? How can you teach programming if you're still giving the same course that you gave 10 years ago? And instead is responsible for facilitating a good learning environment, making sure that people are feeling engaged, that they're asking good questions, that any roadblocks in the way, even simple things like interpersonal conflict, can be smoothed over, so that way people can focus on developing themselves. And so in the classroom itself, it puts everyone responsible for their own learning and development. It's just, which is the way we want people to do. We want young people, especially, to take responsibility for their futures and to feel proud of their development. And mobbing does that.
Yeah, and I just drew a connection there, and I think me and my wife were talking about it not that long ago. But it's kind of like a similar thing that happens in the business world. If you're moving towards agility, is instead of a manager telling you what to do, lecturing at you, so to speak, and handing out tasks, a leader, in a mob program, more agile type environment, becomes a coach, facilitating a good, productive environment, right? And it kind of sounds like you're seeing the same switch in the classroom, right? So someone who would traditionally be like a lecturer, dispenser of facts and tasks for you to go do on yourself, becomes kind of a facilitator, coach, mentor kind of thing. And I feel like mobbing, I've been thinking this for a while, so bear with me if it feels kind of wild, but I feel like mobbing in many ways is a return to a very ancient style of education, where it's like you have the mentor and he has his disciples or, mentees who are with him, and it's a small group, It's not a cattle call of 50 people in a class or whatever. And they just either do something together or they discuss together, and the coach is there to help facilitate the discussion and guide, but not, just lecture and tell people what to do or what to believe, kind of thing. So yeah, that's so you say you do mobbing as part of meetups or class? Do you do classroom type stuff now, or?
Yeah, I do weekly workshops, so week-long workshops for new programmers, especially neuroscience and biology researchers, and I do these evening meetups as well.
Okay,
and
cool.
I found that mob programming is taking over everything I do. It's really incredible. And I finally made the switch recently when I realized that I've been holding on that so I have to advertise courses, and then institutes will decide if they want to hire me or not to teach the course. And so I'll teach oftentimes within Germany, but even throughout Europe, I'll visit someplace for a week and we'll do a course. And I always felt this conflict when trying to advertise a course. I wanted to make it as accessible as possible, so to lower the requirements as much as possible, especially knowing that if I said intermediate, probably there'd be lots of differences anyway. But the institute and all the students wanted to feel like they were getting the most value out of the course as possible. So that would make me promise that they would learn everything. They learn everything about programming. They learn they learn all the cool machine learning tricks in 2 days. They go from nothing to everything. And that's happening a lot in all these data science workshops and trainers and boot camps and nonsense that's been happening. And it's a false promise, right? There's no way for me to promise that if they show up to my course, no matter who they are, their background, what happens, that they're going to learn, they're going to leave with all this knowledge. And worst thing was that the greater the discrepancy between those two promises, between those two problems, that it would be accessible and it would be excellent, the greater the difference between the people that showed up, right? There'd be people who came because it was accessible, and they would often get the most value in the beginning of the course. They'd say, oh my gosh, I never thought I could learn to do this. And I can, but of course they'd get lost halfway through the course, right? They'd say, okay, well, I'm sure if I came back and I spent time on it, then I would actually learn it. But now at least you've shown me that it's possible. And that was good. They feel good about this, but I wasn't satisfied by them. By that, I wanted them to be able to take the skills that we practiced and be able to use them the way that they had wanted to when they signed up for the course. On the other hand, you have the intermediate people, or wherever, in some courses they call them expert level people. They got some value in the beginning when they got a comfortable learning environment. They'd hear things that they already knew, and they'd say, well, this is great. Okay, I belong here. This is fantastic. And then they get bored while everyone caught up. And then right when things started to get interesting, we start getting into all the advanced topics, I'd end the course, right? Time's up. And the feedback would always be, why didn't you do more of that? That was the good stuff. And of course the answer is, well, we needed the fundamentals in order to get here. And then I started playing around with the order events. I started teaching the advanced stuff first and the fundamental stuff last, and realized that actually that worked sometimes even better than the other way. And what I've noticed with mob programming is that when you put an intermediate level person and a beginner level person together, both people can get what they need out of the same moment, right? They're all learning different lessons at the same time. So instead of there being a pull between those two groups, now they're moving forward, and each of them can be focusing on a different element. And even the most anxious person who doesn't think that they should be programming at all is at least typing and asking questions and wondering, and even is comfortable asking high level questions like, what are we supposed to do here? What is going on? Of course, this isn't possible without test-driven development. I found that that's core to everything, to making that whole environment safe for people to work inside. And the great thing about that is it teaches using the scientific method on a minute-to-minute basis, which is key to science education. Realizing that your internal model of the world is not the same as the world out there, that you have to make guesses and then you have to revise your belief constantly, even in something you yourself created, or you feel like you created when you write software, um, helps give you I think helps make you appreciate like maybe the beauty of the world around you, and also give you the confidence that you can go forward and discover things and find stable ground even when you realize you don't know what's around you. And so it's been great. It's been a really positive atmosphere to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. Something really jumped out to me. And then I'll let you ask questions too, Chris. Sorry.
I'm good. I'm good. Go ahead.
So, so obviously with the times, we were involved before with our kids' education, but we're more involved than before now. And I feel like there's a great synergy going on between Agile and feedback loops, and this kind of maybe mob style education and feedback loops, and also quantity, right? Like batch size, almost from like a lean perspective, right? So if you have a traditional classroom where you're lecturing to 40 people, you're delivering one set of content, right? And those 40 people might be at 40 different levels, as you said, right? And I don't know what your theories are on learning, but some things that have really stood out to me is like the simple way to say it is easy plus one. Wherever you're currently at and what's easy, you want to be doing plus one above that, right? I think Piaget says like you want to be at your zone of proximal learning.
Or the fluent edge, I think I've heard it referred to as well by the Larsons.
Oh, cool. Right on. I haven't heard that one. Yeah. But that's incredibly challenging as a teacher with 40 kids or 40 students or 40, college students, where everyone's at different levels. You know what I mean? Like, I think you're right. Beginner and intermediate are there, but then there's like 1,000 nuances of those two as well. And so, and that's the one thing I love about mobbing is that when we're learning together, like you were saying, it's almost like everyone's getting their easy plus one in the same moment almost, right?
Yeah.
And which I just think is impossible at scale with other styles. That was more of a comment than a question, but just sharing because this is very exciting for me. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I remember when the whole "No Child Left Behind" concept became big news, and people started worrying about teaching to the lowest common denominator. And then before that, they were trying to combat this idea of teaching to the middle, that you'd kind of sacrifice everyone and try to standardize education in a factory way so that people could go from first grade to second grade to third grade. And whenever those two zones would start to deviate, you'd either you treat them differently. One, you'd make them repeat a thing, and another, you'd kind of give supplemental attention whenever you could, if you could. And in graduate school, oftentimes they're not teaching to the middle or to the lowest common denominator. They're trying to look for diamonds in the rough. So the goal is to everyone passes, especially in science. If you're doing a master's, everyone passes. They don't care about that. They're looking for the best researchers to become the research assistants.
Yeah.
And so they say, well, if you're understanding this, great, work with me so that we can mob together in the lab. And if you don't, I don't care. You're probably not going to be studying this anyway. And this is so every teacher's got their strategy for trying to deliver impact. And the first way they do it is by rejecting 2/3 of the students in the room, right? If you're going to sign up for a course and you're going to spend half your life or half a year taking that course at the cost of not doing other things, knowing that you're going to be sacrificed, you might be sacrificed and not be able to progress on that line. I mean, that's a very dispiriting thought, isn't it? And mob programming says, well, if you're mobbing, if you're doing a flipped classroom approach, you don't have to reject anyone, right? That conflict doesn't exist in the first place. And this scales all the way up to the level of schools and universities and countries. You might get a degree in one thing, but the university that you came from will affect those impression of whether it's a good degree or not, right? Many of my friends are from Middle Asian countries. Oftentimes that they got master's degrees and some got PhDs, and they're treated as though the degrees are worthless paper, right? We have this impression that some schools are good and others are worthless, but most people are not going to the best schools in the world. But and just because someone's going to a school that has a lot of recognition doesn't really mean much about their education either. It's another black box. Instead, you learn very quickly just through interacting with them if they have the right attitude towards learning. If they connect ideas really well, they're able to collaborate and make connections really well. And I think mob programming could allow, using mob programming and flipped classrooms could allow classrooms in any country in the world to start delivering the best level of education they can, even if the teacher themselves doesn't necessarily have the background or knowledge, core knowledge needed, to convey that knowledge in a traditional way. So I think it could be revolutionary, just and absolutely level the education system.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic transition point to another one of the topics that we're talking about, where what does it look like for mobbing to provide experiential platforms that drive institutional level changes to classrooms and education in general? Where do you see that going?
Well, I think there are a few different things that could change. One is that it could help give more value to interdisciplinary areas of study. Right now, that's kind of the weakest. I see that as kind of the weakest area that we currently have, even though we know there's a lot of value in interdisciplinary fields, mostly because it's unclear how to teach a mixture of different things. Right? We know that combining sets of knowledge can produce huge amounts of knowledge, but we don't know how to do that. So what do? You send students to a bunch of one course in, I don't know, biology or physics, and then a bunch of mathematics courses, and then you have one course in the middle that kind of does some of both.
Merges them, yeah.
And then you say, okay, now you know both. You know something new, and that's not true. But but with project-oriented learning, which could be, which flipped classrooms are very good for, then every person that's there, you start benefiting from a diverse group of students, who can find ways to add value to the current moment and suggest different areas of study.
Yeah, I think I've seen this myself actually in person at a number of. I have my master's in data science and machine learning sort of stuff, and one of my classes while I was getting the degree, I was also doing mob programming at the same time. And so in one of those classes, we actually did a number of kind of machine learning related activities as a mob in a classroom. And I think the end result was that people that didn't quite understand what they were looking for ended up walking away with a lot more knowledge than they had. And then the people that really did understand even came away with the right questions to ask to get even better. And so I was in a number of different classes that incorporated mobbing in them. And in each of those, I saw a much more even distribution of knowledge across a spectrum of abilities and or knowledge. And so I think I've seen firsthand what you're talking about, and I totally agree. And so I'm curious, like, how does it get into the education system? And I know we're talking about it right now, and that's spreading it a little bit. And do you have any ideas of how that moves faster, or how do scientific groups start incorporating this more, that sort of thing? How does the word get spread?
Well, I think there are a few different ways that this can be done, and depending on whether we're talking about scientific research or we're talking about undergraduate level education, there will be very different approaches. And scientific research, one of the first ways that I found has been helpful is by encouraging open software development and open data. People are very afraid of their work being stolen and published before they can. All right, and so sometimes this promotes secretive behaviors, which decreases feedback. And I've seen that when I work with someone and we flip the switch and we go from private repo to public repo, or we publish a data set, they go through this emotional change that often takes a good week for them to get over the anxiety and fear and just, oh my God, what have I done? Feeling. And then there's the shame spiral, which is, oh my God, this is terrible work. No one's going to like this. They're going to see that I'm a terrible person. To getting past all of that before they start saying, okay, well, now it's out there. Let's get this cleaned up. And now that the clock is ticking, what can I do to be productive and get to something that's good? Shoot, this thing is going to be really hard. I don't know how to do this. Okay, I need help. And once they think I need help, this is a roadblock to me getting to the next goal, they start collaborating much more intimately with the people around them. And this helps a lot. And so that's one of the things. And there's another thing that's been really interesting in the life sciences, and that's that authorship lists for papers has gotten longer and longer. Right now, most of it's like the first author did all of the work, the last author paid for all the work, and the people in the middle were owed favors,
I think I've seen that before.
Yeah. But now there's so much machine learning, like there's so many skills that are needed just to get published once, that those middle authors are becoming more and more important. And the duration of PhDs has scaled dramatically. In Germany, it's supposed to be 3 years. In Europe, it's supposed to be 3 years for a PhD. It's now an average of 6 or 7 years for a neuroscience PhD, and it keeps getting longer.
Yeah.
And the percentage of people that are able to get jobs after that in academia keeps dropping too. And so there's this pressure on performance that kind of wasn't, I want to say, I don't know if it was there or not, but it's really obvious when someone is moving forward or when they're not.
Yeah.
So this acceptance that, okay, we're working on a team on a paper, and there are skills that I'm not going to learn ever, but I need it to accomplish this thing, I think is helping to promote a more diverse environment. Mm-hmm. But in order for that to really happen, there are going to need to be changes in how funding and management in science works. And that's been a real cultural barrier, and just like in IT industry and other places. Right now, it's a one project, one person funding system. Yeah. And that promotes segregation in knowledge, siloing of knowledge, in a way that needs to be overcome. And so we'll see what that's like. And that's mostly why I became a freelancer instead of doing another postdoc. I found that when I became a postdoc, I was given one project, and I was either collaborating with people and then being told that I was abandoning my actual work, even though I saw a lot of good impact and a lot of, like, we were accomplishing a lot, or I was working on my project, but I was often going in the wrong direction because I was missing some key piece of knowledge that someone down the hall had. As a freelancer, no one has to give me credit for authorship, right? I can actually I can work as a team to discover things about the brain, and people appreciate my help and value my time, and that's been kind of neat to do. And I'd like to get back into the lab someday and take that kind of attitude with me.
Yeah. What do you think is the driver? Because you were saying the management philosophy in science and research is one project, one person. What do you know the driver for that? I mean, we've speculated or talked about it on the show before for the business world, but I'm interested in the academic world, what the driver is for that.
Well, there are a few reasons for it. One has to do with getting funding later in the early stages of a scientific career. To do that, you have to establish yourself as being an expert in a certain field. The way to do that is to be first author on a paper. Okay. So that's the first thing. You need a few first authorships to show that you know this thing, and the money should go to you because you're the person that knows how to build on it. So that's the first one. How do you get those opportunities? Well, someone above you got funding to do this thing because they had some experience, and they convinced the funding body that they had the resources to give a good learning environment to someone. But they only had enough money, but the money doesn't go, like, it can't be spent as they want it to be. And isn't now there's lots of different ways of funding a lab. So this isn't always, but maybe this is more kind of the standard way. So what you do is you get a certain amount of money for equipment and to hire a certain number of PhD students and postdocs. And to justify that number of people, you have to divide up a project into sub-projects. And so the people get the sub-projects, which are supposed to be small. They turn out to be much bigger than they really were. You start getting this wishful thinking that happens with normal waterfall style design, the same way like what we've seen in software development. And this is in science, where you're claiming that you know what's happening in the world, and then you're saying we're going to do a project that will prove that that thing exists, even though we don't know it exists, right? And you have the same pull. You want to get the money, you have to make a bigger promise, which means a bigger change in our current knowledge, which means it's the same problem that you see with software, except hopefully on a much greater level, just because it should touch the limits of human knowledge. Oftentimes it's not. There are certain ways that labs will ensure they get more funding by claiming that they plan to discover something that they already discovered last year. So it gets hard to tell who's on the cutting edge versus who's just kind of playing the game well. It's very tough.
Yeah. So I've seen this obviously in a smaller scale in a different environment. I feel like there's this correlation in the Agile world and the education world with estimates and schedules and the negative effects. So I know you love estimates and schedules, Chris, right? So, but I think it's a similar type thing where, like, even if you take it to a small scale of like, hey, you're going to learn at this pace, and by the end of it, we're going to, promise this outcome or something like that. And it's just like, for one, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know, how this student's going to progress along that pace. So to set a schedule for more than the next day or so is because things are going to change. They're going to learn faster and they're going to be bored, or they're going to learn slow and need to slow down. And what's fascinating to hear is it's like the same kind of things are happening with the big brains and the research projects and things like that. Is they're estimating big to get big funding, and then they're trying to hit a deadline that, if I'm understanding it right, that they're not sure they can, but they have to try. And incentive structures. So we talked a lot about on the show, incentive structures being about the individual, right? So being the first name on an author paper will be a disincentivized collaboration. This is just really all fascinating for me. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
So
and imagine if that company finally got the deadline, they had to release their product, but no one could tell if it worked or not.
Reproducibility.
Right. You publish a paper, it looks good. It gets no one's going to look at it closer for another 4 or 5 years. And if they do look closer and they find that there's nothing there, nothing happens, right? They just move on to a different paper. So yeah, you can keep that cycle going for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And this touched on this. This is when I read Alan Ward's Lean Product Development. This is there was this emphasis, like half the book was about pilot experiments and developing trade-off curves. He put so much emphasis on the fact that you have to find out you have to generate generalizable knowledge from what you don't know in order to be able to move forward and to plan that into every stage of your work. And I thought that was just that's very good science, and I'd love to see situations where the researchers are very confident in what they're doing because they've done it a dozen times, in smaller ways. Instead, what often happens is you do one little thing just to feel like you belong, and then you take the big risk, the Hail Mary experiment, hoping that it all pays off, and you get done right about the time your deadline is. You have to make something of it. So with software, what people often learn very quickly is it's not rocket science. Like it's not overly complicated in terms of being able to start. and that you're often limited by your knowledge. And the quickest way to get knowledge is to test it, to make guesses, to make smaller steps, and to ask for help. And mob programming really embodies all of that in every moment of working.
Fantastic.
Yeah, super cool stuff. Wow. Well, so we're coming somewhat close to the end of the show. Is there anything you'd like to share or plug before we close it out?
No, actually, if you're listening to this and you're a science researcher and you'd like to do some mob programming and you'd like a facilitator to help you get started, send me an email or a message on LinkedIn, and be happy to do that. And if you're a researcher and you're looking for someone to work with your software development team, same thing. I'm here.
Fantastic.
Well, but really enjoyed this one. It's been combining two of my favorite worlds with agile mobbing and education and even classical education type stuff. So this has been really a fun episode, and I could probably tempted to talk to Nick all day about it, but we will close out the show. And so please like and subscribe. We would love your feedback on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, all the places you can reach us. And we'll be putting links in the show notes for things we talked about today. But until next time, mob well and have a good one. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much, guys.